I look at someone like Elon Musk and I see sheer compulsion, not discipline. An addiction is compulsion. Yeehaw! We are back with another daily reflection on the Daily Vedantic. And today's reflection is on one of my favorite definitions of Vedanta. This comes from a conversation with my teacher, Joseph, that was, I think it was episode 54 on our other podcast, Yoga for Your Intellect. The episode is called On Control. I think it's episode 54, but the title is definitely On Control. We actually just covered it today we had Venice Vedanta Club, which is our hang here in Venice, in LA, with people really from all over SoCal drive in for it. But once a month, we go over one of our Yoga for Your Intellect episodes. People bring questions, thoughts, reflections. And today's episode, this month's episode, was On Control. In that episode, which is a fantastic episode, Joseph just crushes so many different amazing points, and so many cool concepts naturally come out of an episode on self-control. But one of the things that he said it was just subtle within the episode. And when I was listening to it again, I thought, man, that is something to reflect on. He said a Zen master once told him that definition of Zen is knowing when to stop. Since we recorded that episode, I've thought about a definition for Vedanta. And Zen, for listeners, you might already have heard this chronology. You have these 4 Vedas, these textbooks that nearly all Eastern philosophy is built on, the Vedas. The oldest one, I think, in 2016 that we know of, the Rig Veda. A portion of the Rig Veda was dated to 6,000 from one of the finds of an ancient version of it to 6,000 BC. In 2016, so a few years ago, I was like, wow, these are older than we thought. And that's 8,000 years of this lineage within this philosophy. But it's also been those 4 textbooks. Vedanta, another word for, or another definition of Vedanta is end of the Vedas, because Veda, Anta, those are 2 Sanskrit words that mean the end of the Vedas. So put together, you have Vedanta. But this lineage, not only has it led to people teaching today, like any of the links in the show notes to this episode will take you to, but it's also been the foundation of which thousands of years into the Vedas existing, you have Hinduism and a whole litany of rituals get built on top of this philosophy. Then you have, as the adage goes, Buddhism, which is Hinduism made for export, simplified back to the philosophy as it leaves India and enters China. Then from China, you have a derivation like Zen that leaves China and enters Japan. And you follow it all the way back to the Vedas. End of the Vedas, the reason it's called Vedanta, into the Vedas, is because the Vedas will include all kinds of different aspects to living life. But the end portion, it's also called the Upanishads. Sanskrit has like 12 words for everything. The Upanishads, which means sit close below, because you receive, this predates the written word. It was an oral tradition long before it was ever written down, before the written word existed, before an alphabet system existed to write this down. But this philosophical portion of the Vedas, the end of the Vedas, that's where the worldview, the approach to life, the philosophy was. They're close cousins. The philosophies are such close cousins with each other. Same thing with Jainism or Taoism, Buddhism, Zen, obviously a derivation of Buddhism, is going to be quite close to it. Hinduism, Vedanta, the philosophy in the Upanishads. But I felt like when Joseph said this, I was like, man, that's such a great definition for Vedanta as well. Knowing when to stop. What does that mean? Well, every philosophy, every appointment for therapy, every religion, what these all have in common, the through line between them all is They are all methods to avoid self-sabotage. From philosophy to psychotherapy to church on Sundays, temple on the Sabbath, that is an approach to ensure you don't get in your own way, to get out of your own way, to not be the cause, which we so often are, of the very suffering we are trying to avoid. And this idea of knowing when to stop, it's kind of, that is the mastery to avoid self-sabotage. It might be knowing when to stop once you've watched 4 episodes of Animal Planet. It might be knowing when to stop with the 8th bite of ice cream. It might be knowing when to stop when you have been lazing around and recuperating from a bit of intense work. It might be knowing when to stop when you're in the midst of intense work. Silicon Valley, I know so many workaholics where it is more compulsion than it has anything to do with discipline. I look at someone like Elon Musk and I see sheer compulsion, not discipline. I see it in my own life where it's actually in the Gita where it says, be wary, and honestly, the goal is to not take new undertakings. And the lesson is to be wary of new undertakings, of entanglements, of more involvement in the world. And it's not what you do, it's what you do it for. In many ways, you could run 5 companies and be a sage, an enlightened being that is not doing it from compulsion, but doing it out of service. I mean, so many of the sages, Shankaracharya was basically Mother Teresa, Socrates, and Einstein all in one. He was brilliant across multiple different vectors, building schools, articulating, re-articulating, rediscovering philosophical truths, living it. He had quite the mathematical mind as well. And there's this line between what you're doing it for and you just doing it. You could be running 5 companies, and are you doing it for yourself? This is just my opinion. Might be a complete projection out of my own compulsion. But I look at someone like Elon Musk and I say, man, that feels like a lot of compulsion. An addiction is compulsion. If someone's a workaholic, that is not necessarily, that is not a good thing. Not even not necessarily. If someone's addicted to work, they're trying to escape something. This premise of knowing when to stop, it's such a beautiful, succinct articulation of what philosophy, therapy, spirituality can become for us. I say it is the mastery. It is an articulation of the mastery of yourself. As Muhammad said, the greatest jihad is the conquest of oneself. If you know when to stop and you can actually stop there, you have mastered yourself. You have conquered the hardest thing to conquer. Alexander the Great was famously in a conquest in India. He had taken over nearly the entire known world and was told that there was this sage that was this brilliant lighthouse for many of the villages and communities around. And he was famous for wanting to go meet the different sages, philosophers. He studied under Aristotle. So he was quite philosophically inclined, maybe more from a curiosity perspective than a lived experiential perspective. But he had obviously accomplished quite a bit. And he asked to go chat with this sage. He wanted to give his appreciation for the service he was providing to those villages and communities around him. So he asked to get taken to the sage. He's taken to him, and the sage just lying with his arms out right under the sun. And Alexander, as the story goes, didn't know if he was dead or not. So he says, hey, he has his translator say this for him. Hey, are you the sage that everybody has been telling me about that serves the communities around here? Sage doesn't move. He's worried he might be dead. So he says it louder, and the translator repeats it loudly. Are you the sage we've been told about that serves the communities around here? Sage opens his eyes. Alexander gets in between him and the sun, looks down, and has his translator say it a third time, even more loudly. And the sage, with that sunlight interrupted, sits up and says, who is asking the question? And Alexander the Great says, I'm Alexander the Great, conqueror of all the known world. Who are you? And the sage says, I'm the one that's conquered the desire to conquer the known world. Alexander, after an interaction for a few more minutes, says, as kind of somewhat impressed by this sage, a bit humbled, maybe a little bit perturbed by the lack of respect for him as this emperor, but mostly humbled and somewhat impressed, says, is there anything that I can offer you in appreciation for the service that you provide for these villages and communities? And the sage said, you can help me with one thing. And Alexander said, your wish is my command. Say it, anything you want, and it's yours. The sage says, can you get out of my sunlight? That is mastery of oneself, conquering the need, the desire to conquer the world. Knowing that you don't need to fight 100 battles across 100 lands. If you can fight one within yourself and win. If you know that the real battlefield is here and it stops here. You know when and how to stop. You've mastered yourself. The greatest conquest there is. That is today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time.